Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last of the Faster Project webinars. It's been a fantastic 2 years. We've covered all sorts of topics, everything from very kind of EV 101 basics to help anyone who's completely new to electric vehicles to understand what's out there, what's the practicality, what's the affordability, the reliability, how can you get your hands on an electric vehicle, how can you get the most out of it, right the way through to some proper nitty-gritty kind of technical topics. Is interesting. You definitely see the difference in the audience who turn up for those, but we were obviously been asking the questions that need to be asked about how we can improve not just electric vehicle charging infrastructures, but electric vehicles and their sustainability as a whole. So although we're not quite done yet, we've still got one last webinar to go. I'd love to thank all of the panelists we've had on the previous Faster webinars and indeed the in-person roadshows. But this is it. This is the last one. And today we are going to be covering how the Faster project has panned out in Northern Ireland. And we have a stellar panelist lineup for you today. So if everyone would like to switch on their cameras, we have Pamela Arthurs and Sharon Digby from East Border Region. We have Chris Kelly from EasyGo, who's providing the new rapid chargers going into Northern Ireland. We've got Chris Maguire from NIE Networks, who's providing the juice to them. We've got Darren Henderson, voice of the Northern Irish EV driver himself, EVA&I represented today. Gareth Loy, who's actually sticking these chargers in the ground from M&M Contractors, and Tim Weir from the Department for Infrastructure. So yeah, today promises to be a fascinating session. Welcome to all of you. I suppose it would be great to go back to the very start, because all of the three different jurisdictions of the Faster project, Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and rural west of Scotland, did go about things a little bit differently during the project. So Pamela and Sharon, I'd love to bring you in to talk about who was brought into the consortium for Northern Ireland early on and why.
Yes, hello everyone. Well, could I just begin by saying that today we are actually in a very good place with the project. I will, of course, go back to the beginning, but when we launched the project, we would have doubled the number of rapid chargers in Northern Ireland. Our target of 25 we have exceeded. We've got 27 in the ground now, so that's a really good news story. Those are rapid chargers from 50 to some 180. So we have exceeded our expectations, but it hasn't been easy. It has been an extremely challenging project, and the people on this call, it took everyone across a range of different partners, different organizations working with us, from the departments to NIE, to actually make this happen within what was an excruciatingly short time frame. Excellent contractors on EasyGo, M&M, etc. Everybody combined really made this project happen. So apologies for that, but I just thought today on this date, things are looking very good. We have those chargers in the ground. You'll hear about them later. Now, they're not commissioned yet, but they're in the ground. You'll hear about that later. So back to the very beginning. Obviously, there was an amount of money in the INTERREG 5A programme for sustainable transport. SEUPB had gone out on a call to ask for a consortium to deliver. They hadn't got anybody coming back in terms of leading. So therefore nothing happened, which obviously meant it had to go out again. So ourselves in East Border, because of our long track record in managing and delivering INTERREG projects, we were asked to look at developing the consortium. Obviously, in Northern Ireland, it was University of Ulster who stepped up to the plate and said, look, we would we would look primarily at, the site selections and the installations. So that is where, in terms of Northern Ireland, those two organisations, ourselves as lead, and then the University of Ulster coming in. Obviously, then we needed our local authorities. And the local authorities have been key. And again, bear in mind, everyone, this is a completely new field for local authorities. And that goes not just in Northern Ireland, but in Ireland, in the border counties. So they have undergone in the last couple of years a very steep learning curve, in terms of all of this. And that's still moving and changing and developing. But I do think that partners, from my perspective, partners, everybody that has done this webinar today and others, really need commended for the fact that we're here and we actually have exceeded the target. And we have more than doubled, obviously, the rapid charger numbers in Northern Ireland. And who benefits at the end of the day? It's the electric car, the user. And also to commend, Southwest College in terms of the behavioural change element as well, encouraging the public to go out there and to invest in electric vehicles. So I suppose my main message is today, it's good news, but that in no way masks the challenges, the hurdles, the obstacles that we've had. And also to commend the funders as well. We have SEUPB on here, the key funder, and obviously in Northern Ireland, we have the Department for Infrastructure, who also match fund. So it's a very wide circle of, behind the scenes of organisations, people who have made this happen. Thanks, Euan.
Very well said. And thanks for the spoiler alert about the good news story. We were going to get into some of that.
Sorry,
no, honestly,
that I have to leave, so I felt it was necessary.
No, that's good. So
everybody can be repeated.
so genuinely, like before we came online today, obviously the panelists were all kind of chatting away, and there are numerous bits that have exceeded my own incredibly stringent expectations as well, which I'm looking forward to getting stuck into as we go on. So yeah, the situation within the FASTER project in Northern Ireland is much rosier than I'd ever expected it to be, and indeed the wider EV charging situation in Northern Ireland is looking much rosier too. But of course, we'll be covering those questions in just a minute. So, just as a quick reminder for anyone who didn't see the Scottish or Republic of Irish versions of these webinars, the specification of the tender basically for these chargers, what were we looking for as a bare minimum? I know that there was a number of chargers mentioned, but in terms of like the speed of those chargers, the types of vehicles or plugs that they support, tell us more. So again, I think that's yourself, Pamela, and Sharon as well.
Yes, well, we were bound by the fund there, and the fund said it should be a minimum of 50. Obviously, as the sites were selected and when EasyGo were appointed, they looked at the sites, and if there was capacity was key. And based on their expertise, we then were able to move to 75s in some cases and 180s in others. But that was very much obviously the capacity at the sites and the expertise of EasyGo, delivering for us. But I mean, the minimum and the output in terms of the fund. And again, this must be borne in mind for others who are maybe looking on. It's not just a case of we're out and we're installing chargers. We're doing it within certain parameters, within the parameters of, an EU funded project, and within parameters of Ulster, University of Ulster's procurement, and there's a number of factors that all make it a bit more challenging, and particularly challenging, I suppose I keep repeating it, the time frame. If we'd more time, but in saying that, the tight time frame focus minds. And again, I would commend our contractor, their M&M. They certainly focused and have delivered. And I'm not going to take Gareth's thunder, but storms and etc. Despite all of that, we're here. But no, it was at least 50, Euan, and as I say, we have exceeded that in a number of areas, and we've also put in some of the leisure centres, we have maybe 4 chargers, so we've increased there and again across the geographical area, obviously 3 council areas that we were working in.
And I mean, as far as Northern Ireland goes, that's somewhat unprecedented to have that many chargers in the same location, especially rapid chargers. So that is exciting news indeed. When it comes to identifying suitable sites, so a couple of kind of considerations for this would be who owns the land, who needs to provide permission, and how much grid capacity is there. So first and foremost, the sites that were selected, who owned that land and who needed to provide that permission? Was it local authorities? Was it Department for Infrastructure, or some sort of combination of both? Or was it private land?
In Northern Ireland, it was local authorities. It differs across the 3 jurisdictions. Well, actually, just in Scotland. But no, in Northern Ireland, now originally we had looked at using car parks. So we set off thinking that we could use car parks, but we had an issue there in that the car parks, the legacy car parks, which were handed over to councils in 1996 by the then Department of Regional Development, had a stipulation you can only charge for car parking. So that was an, we talked with our colleagues in DFI about that. We could have moved on at risk in those car parks, but we didn't know that would change to allow us to charge for electric vehicles. So we couldn't take that risk in the short time frame of the project. I understand that you now can do that. I think that changed, and Tim will be able to clarify that maybe it's October of this year, but that would have been too late. In terms of the project, this project, the funding comes to an end on the 31st of December. Everything needs to be claimed before that date and invoiced and claimed. So we couldn't take the risk. So obviously we had to change tack midstream. And then that was where we again, based on the parameters of the funding, public owned local authority buildings. So that's where we moved there. So I say this is just part of the challenges that we had. And then we had looked at separate grid connections there. That again, the time frame. So we had to change. That was a second approach that we had to change. And the third approach then was behind the meter connections in the local authority buildings. And again, that was provided a lot of angst really for a lot of the local authorities, because it didn't really, this is new, as I say. They needed to get their head around what does this actually mean for us and all of that. But as I say, we've worked it out. But that is where it led us. So we started in one direction, we changed, and then back to this one. And again, in terms of that, NIE, very useful, working with us. NIE, from the outset of our meetings with them, said, we want to see this project happening. We're your partners in this, and they have been. But the key problem in many of the buildings, many of the sites that we wanted to provide was capacity. If the capacity isn't there, we can't do it. So, but I say, back to the point, we're here, we've got 27, we've exceeded the target. So there's a lot more that can be done in the future. But I think faster we can look back and say it's made a very positive impact. And it's also upskilled across the local authorities as well in terms of this. What does it mean? And in the course of the next 7 years, the contract with EasyGo, a lot of learning will happen there as well. And I think it'll pave the way for the future, for easier, that this might be a wee bit easier, because certainly we've a lot of I suppose, expertise to share now.
Certainly sounds it. And before I bring in Chris McGuire to discuss NIE Network's involvement with the project and finding and identifying that suitable grid capacity, Tim, obviously Department for Infrastructure was mentioned there with regards to kind of legacy council car park legislation, which has been recently changed. Are you able to divulge a bit more information on the nature of those changes and from the exact date that they apply?
Well, before going on to that, Euan, just from my own point of view, prior to doing the job that I currently do, I was on the EU side of stuff in the department. So I'll ramp this back it's great to see the culmination of a project, because I can go back to working with colleagues from Scotland and Ireland and SUPB to getting a sustainable transport theme in the INTERREG programme. That was where I came into this at the start. So that started off, and let's put a sustainable transport theme into the INTERREG programme, which is very much aligned to the sustainable transport hierarchy. So there are three areas being supported. So we looked at greenways, public transport, and then switching fuels. And our sustainable transport hierarchy is aligned to supporting active travel, modal shift to public transport, and then switching fuels. So I was in at the very start of this development of the programme, and then to see a project at this stage then delivering in one of those thematic areas is fantastic. So there's a lot of work. It's great to see the work that people did in the project, but there's a lot of work went on way back in 2012, 2013, working with SUPB and the European Commission to get something in the programme that would fund these type of projects. And if you think back to what the situation was around uptake of EVs and EV charging infrastructure then and where we are now, so it's how these programs are designed. Yes, so it was great that we were able to support this particular project and also develop that theme. In terms of the car parks issue, yes, that was something that was highlighted as this project started. And as Pamela rightly pointed out, it was for the project to decide if it wanted to proceed at risk. And I think they made a wise decision to sit back and not go it. At the minute, the position is there has to be legislation amended to enable the car parks to be used differently. That process the department is taking forward in conjunction with all our local councils. It's one of those strange things where we can't do something unilaterally. It requires everybody to move at the same pace, and the moves are being moved along. The legislation to do that has been drafted. It is then dependent on us having an assembly to pass it and move it on. But what we're advising people is in those local authorities at this point in time, because that legislation has been drafted and waiting to go through, they can proceed if they want to do that within their car parks. So hopefully, that clarifies that.
So yeah, sounds like a solution is coming hopefully very soon. And the fact that everyone's on board with that, singing from the same hymn sheet, bodes very well. With regards to identifying suitable sites, with regards to grid capacity though, Chris McGuire, I'd love to bring you in on this. So obviously you would have been brought into the project fairly early on and would have been approached by Pamela and the team. In terms of finding those suitable sites, were you able to divulge straight away this particular substation or this particular building has this much capacity, or do people have to come to you and say, I would like this much, and then you can say yes or no? Because I've seen that happen in mainland Britain with some DNOs before, but how much information could you give without being asked, I suppose, and tell us more about your own personal involvement in the project?
Yeah, hi everyone. So from the perspective of understanding where there's capacity in the network, so we do have an open data portal there that you can go on and you can see the size of transformers in given locations, from a mapping perspective. Well, that'll tell you what size that existing transformer is, not necessarily the capacity or headroom on it. In terms of the network visibility of headroom on assets, it's fairly limited at the moment, and we're just embarking on a project where we're going to be installing monitors at a lot of our substations, where then we can in real time see what that demand is. And as that data becomes more available to ourselves, then in turn that'll become more available to stakeholders. So at the moment the visibility isn't ideal there. So that now requires then when you would submit an application, there's a fairly intensive process of going in and monitoring that unique asset and finding out what that demand is. So at the start of the project then, whenever we were engaging with Pamela and we were looking at new connection sites, there's obviously the possibility of there will be new infrastructure needed there for a new connection. And typically, you'll have to lay infrastructure in third-party properties, and that'll require legalities and so on. And the risk there in terms of timelines, as Pamela pointed out, was everything has to be completed by the end of the year. So there would be a risk there in getting those legalities and stuff in place. And then we discussed alternatives. And from that, then we discussed that option of utilising maximum input capacity on existing connections. So there's a lot of existing connections out there that have a maximum input capacity that the occupier is not actually using, and that sort of retained headroom in your given connection And that's where this project then was looking at what is the headroom with existing connections that then can be utilized for this additional infrastructure. And there's no need for any wider network reinforcement or anything to accommodate that, as it's already in the network capacity.
Oh, great to hear that there's so much modernization coming in terms of getting that kind of forecasting of available capacity and so on as well. That's really interesting. One thing that I've kind of learned while speaking to various different charge point operators is the different, well, a rapid charger is not just a rapid charger. Some of them can get away with a low voltage grid connection, and some of them require high voltage grid connections. So with the faster project chargers, the original spec of 50 kilowatt chargers, I believe, would have gone on to a comparatively low voltage line, which is quite widespread in Northern Ireland. I understand that high voltage network is somewhat lacking outside of Belfast. It does exist, but there's not as much of it. Are any of the rapid chargers that have been installed as part of the faster project connected to a high voltage connection? I'm intrigued by that.
So the high voltage network does run around the country then, and there will be low voltage cables and overhead lines coming off those transformers, dropping that voltage down from high voltage to low voltage. In terms of the connections then for this project, I think they were all low voltage connections. It's generally when you go over a megawatt of capacity, you would generally be going down a high voltage connection, and the customer then will have their own transformer stepping the voltage down on site. There is some challenges around DC chargers and the harmonic emissions that the chargers will have. And maybe in this particular project, there was some challenges we faced in the fact that we didn't know which chargers would be installed until after the procurement process. So again, that introduces an uncertainty in the project that you can't assess the network for the equipment without knowing what that equipment is. So again, it was one of the challenges we faced. That's
a good point. Yeah, with harmonics, I understand that there are ways you can compensate for that with resistors, capacitors, inductors. It's a while since I've read up on it, but there is some clever way that you can sort of try and balance out those harmonics. Was that required at all for this project, or were the harmonics of the chargers actually not too bad once everything had been assessed?
It's a combination of the chargers and the network. So in terms of locations, these were generally like leisure center type facilities, which normally have a substation in close proximity. And the network then is fairly strong, which can allow for larger chargers and that to be installed from a harmonics perspective. So in this particular case, all things worked out positively.
Good to know. Sorry, we got super technical there, but it was just kind of activated my inner nerd. I was intrigued by all of this. So I suppose one final question for this kind of beginning stage of the project would be, and we've already covered quite a few of the potential issues encountered and the ways about them, but I suppose, Pamela, to come back to yourself, were there any other issues that the consortium encountered during this kind of early stage right up to the end of the tendering process, basically? What other issues were encountered, if any, and how did you resolve those?
I suppose it's fair to say that consistently we faced issues. When we had something addressed, something else arose. And again, that it stems back to the fact that this is a new field. We were dealing with, ourselves as lead partner, East Border. We put our hands up from the outset and said, we're good at facilitating and managing INTERREG cross-border funded projects. But in terms of the technicalities of this project, that's not our field. But we had our partners around. But again, with our partners and with Ulster, they had a lot of learning here as well. It wasn't just about the site selection, it was the procurement, it was working with the local authorities, providing the fact that they were providing the infrastructure on local authority owned sites, and still would be. But then the client in the procurement changes at the operational phase from the design and build element, which is Ulster, and then it moves to the councils. So that was obviously a challenge. And then in the course of the project, again, we had more local authorities involved at one stage. But again, with time very much on our side, we needed to award the contract sorry, I should have said not on our side. We needed to award the contract. You know, some of our partner local authorities at that stage still had a number of questions and queries that they felt could not be properly answered for their internal processes, etc. And at that stage, I said, no, you know, we don't feel that we can move forward on the basis that we had to. So therefore, we signed awarded the contract, and obviously from Ulster's perspective, Ulster needed you know, assurances that any of the local authorities would actually operate these things for the 7-year period. Again, this was all a condition of the funding. So yeah, in short, to answer your question, it was consistently problematic. You know, but again, the good news, we have 26 now. The local authorities that are still there, they have benefited because the output needed to be met. So therefore, when their reserve sites now have actual chargers on them, and we still have exceeded that target that we were originally given. Not ideal. We would have preferred that there was a wider geographical spread, but again, back to the core problem of this is new, and people are obviously cautious in most cases of things that are new to them. It was this very steep learning curve.
Very true. And yeah, thank you for preempting one of the points I was going to raise about the number of local authorities involved at the beginning versus the end. So yeah, the east of the country is very well served by Faster now, but obviously the west was meant to get some coverage too, which is a shame. But we'll come back to that because there's potentially some good news to come out of it. However, I want to bring in Darren as the voice of the EV driver. In terms of the locations that Faster has installed chargers at, what has the feedback been from EV drivers so far? Are they happy with the locations that have been chosen and the number of chargers and what they've seen? Is it generally a good news story, despite, of course, the West not having any as part of this project?
Yeah, well, you probably stole some of my thunder there. That, you know, the original plan for all the councils having some, that was really welcomed, because that would have been very equitable. But obviously we are where we are, and look, it's great news to get the 26 or 27 in the ground. It's really good for those areas, primarily Belfast and Ards, Downpatrick, Newcastle, Newry and Newton Ards. It does leave some gaps still on the map that need to be addressed, and hopefully other providers can come in and fill the gap there. But this is good news, and you know, it's remarkable in the time frame that was given to EasyGo at the end of the project to get that many in the ground and ready for commissioning as quickly as they have. So that's a real positive. But you know, it is tinged with a bit of disappointment, I know, from our members that it's not as per the original plan. But you know, that's where we find ourselves.
But this is where there's potentially some good news, because presumably, although there are 5 local authorities out towards the west and towards the north, etc., who were meant to get Faster project chargers, but due to their own internal processes, basically ended up overrunning. And then, of course, Pamela and the team had to make that tough decision to go, right, we'll focus on these 3 who've got all of their ducks in a row, and the result has been very positive in those local authorities. But presumably there were locations within those other 5 local authorities for Faster chargers that have been identified. There would have been grid connections and grid capacity identified. So my question would be, as a kind of legacy of the Faster project, looking beyond the Faster project, how easy would it be for those local authorities that didn't get those Faster project chargers in the end to get another charging network operator, whether it's EasyGo or whether it's someone else, to install that specification of chargers in those locations?
Sorry, Euan, can I come in there?
Yeah, sure.
These are behind the meter connections.
Yeah.
They're connected to the buildings. And that was the crux of the problem, really. If it was a separate grid connection, that was easier for the local authorities. So behind the meter connections, what does that mean in terms of our building? What does that mean in terms of our capacity? What does it mean in terms of, billing was a major issue, for some of the local authorities, and understandably so, because they didn't know how that would actually work. All of those things have been addressed. They've been fairly easily addressed, but no one knew. You know, so that's the problem. And the other thing is, I suppose, to point out that if we hadn't moved ahead with the local authorities we did, the project in Northern Ireland would have fallen, and we would, in essence, have handed back that EU funding, because that's another thing. These are funded. You know, if anyone else wants to do this now, they would have to fund it themselves, or obviously seek funding elsewhere. But local authorities across Northern Ireland are, the ORCS project is ongoing. I'm not entirely sure of what stage it's at. So there are chargers, I'm not sure even if they're rapid, but are going across Northern Ireland in the ORCS project. But that's two key things there: behind the meter connections. But Faster will now demonstrate how that actually works for the other local authorities. So that's another learning from this project. And the funding. These are 100% funded. To local authorities, have no cost there. And the billing, that whole piece on billing has all been dealt with as well, so that it doesn't cost local authorities as we, you know, in the next 7 years. So that's key to that one.
Oh yeah, so a precedent has been set, you know, both in terms of the technicalities of the behind the meter setup, but also, you know, the kind of billing aspect. And I'm pretty sure there'll be charge point operators out there who would install that charging infrastructure and under a concession model, so it wouldn't actually cost the local authority anything. So that's, yeah, it is promising, although there is some skittishness from those local authorities, those remaining 5 local authorities. One would hope that the learnings of the Faster project will be picked up by them, and they'll be able to make full use of that. Incidentally, acronym alert for anyone who's new to this: ORCS is On-Street Residential Charge Point Scheme, which is a Westminster funded scheme that gives a generous amount of grant funding towards installing charge points on street. And we will come back to that later on. Of course, we'll bring in Tim from DFI, such as the unique nature of road and car park management in Northern Ireland. But that's a treat for later. Just now, Darren, I believe that you wanted to come in on this point that's just been raised.
Yeah, I mean, and some of it was covered by Pamela. Look, we all know there was numerous issues and problems for the Faster throughout this, you know, the tenders and grid connections behind the meter. But all of that lessons learned are really, really important, and we need to feed that back through the EV task force, the DFI, DFE, and make sure that knowledge is shared with any other providers coming in. I think that we kind of touched on that before the end of your talk there, but that's really important, that those lessons are learned, especially about the tender process as well, because it was very complicated for Faster.
Really well said. Yeah, I mean, it's important that any EU-funded project does actually feed back its learnings. So it's added value for the people who've paid into that investment. Totally agree on that. And there are loads of really valuable lessons that have been learned here. I'm learning loads just now. But I suppose the next, actually, of course, we're asking lots of good questions here, but it's not just about us, it's about you watching as well. So anyone who's watching live just now, please do pop your questions into the Q&A. I see one of you's found one. There we go. Henry's found one. We'll come back to you. Very good question, actually. So, we might as well answer this one now, because it's a really good question, Henry. What is meant by a behind the meter connection?
I think Chris is probably best placed to answer that.
Go on then, Chris.
And so apologies, everyone. I do have to leave, but I have really enjoyed so far. But Sharon, my colleague, is still on. So thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for all your work as well. It's been great. Thank you. Sorry, I should have pointed out Pamela has to pop off early today and will probably be very promptly replaced by Andrew Benfield from Cenex, who should be joining us slightly. He's having some travel issues at the moment. He's been a bit delayed, but hopefully he'll be with us in just a minute. In fact, no, he is on there. Oh, I see. He's hiding. He's not got his camera or his mic on. He is actually hiding amongst the panelists, but we'll bring him in later on. But yeah, sorry, Chris McGuire. Fantastic. Oh, there's Andrew now. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? But we'll come back to Cenex's involvement in the project later on. But yeah, that question about behind the meter connections. So Chris McGuire, tell us more about that versus a non-behind the meter connection and the implications of both, and how that has potentially helped or hindered the Faster project.
Yeah, so what's meant by that term that's being used for behind the meter is basically that the chargers are connected to an existing supply. So if you have a supply into a building at the moment, the chargers are just fed from the private wiring in that property. So from a grid connection perspective, every property has a maximum import capacity that it's permitted to draw from the network. And in many cases, there is headroom that the building is not actually using at the capacity it's entitled to. So this project looked at, well, what was that gap? What could be utilized there on the existing connection, and the chargers were installed on that basis. The alternative is for new connections to be requested then for charging infrastructure, and new connections then will obviously require new network infrastructure to be installed for that, and there would be costs and obviously time involved there. So that was the challenge, was time in this case, and the charge are connected to existing connections. Obviously, there's no time requirement there from a network perspective because you're utilizing your existing connection.
Thank you very much. And what's interesting about that is, as I was mentioning before we went live, Northern Ireland has this interesting setup where quite a lot of their public type 2 charge points look at first glance like a conventional kind of pedestal mounted charge point, but actually they will be the kind of ones that you would mount on a wall that are sitting on top of a specially made pedestal that has a meter built into them. So when you see those kind of things in car parks and on street in Northern Ireland, where they have a meter built in, as opposed to the likes of Charge Place Scotland, where quite a lot of on-street charge points exist that don't have any meters actually physically built in. What's the reason behind that? Why is that the case in Northern Ireland but not elsewhere? And what are the extra kind of implications for anyone trying to install on-street charging infrastructure of that kind of ilk? Surely someone must know the answer. Tim, as the kind of chief of DFI, have you got any more info on that one?
No idea, Euan.
Fair enough.
What around that idea? I didn't. I thought Chris might have been able to answer that, about the metering aspect of it, because I think it's to do with the electricity supply coming in. I'm not sure.
Apologies, I just missed that there. Do you want to?
Oh, sorry. Right. Yeah. So Northern Ireland, you'll have, instead of having like a pedestal mounted on-street charge point, conventional one like you would get in Charge Place Scotland, you kind of basically have a wall box charge point that's sitting on top of a specially made pedestal that has the meter built in. So it's the fact that the metering is physically included with an on-street charge point as opposed to being located somewhere separately. What's the reason for that within the kind of grid rules of Northern Ireland?
The meter rules, the meter is where the connection is given from NIE's perspective, and there'll be a termination there to some sort of a cutout that's sort of the fuse as well. So that needs to be housed somewhere. And in terms of taking a private cable from that to a charger, say in a different location, if that was in public property, well then there's challenges around having private wiring in public property, which maybe Tim can jump in on. But if it was on private property, well, it's up to the connecting customer to do as they please.
So we had a quick question from Mark McCall from EVA&I, which is, why is that particular rule unique to Northern Ireland as opposed to, certainly I don't think I've seen that in the Republic or mainland Britain. Is there a reason why that kind of setup is a little bit different?
Just to jump in, Euan, it is actually part of the south of Ireland as well.
I've not been vigilant enough. I stand corrected. Well, there we go. So that answers it. So it's an Irish-wide piece of legislation. Okay, that's quite interesting. So I also note a question from Darren regarding the actual faster chargers that have been installed. But first and foremost, I want to bring in Chris Kelly to tell us a wee bit more about those Faster Project chargers. So congratulations on winning the Northern Ireland Faster Project tender, Chris of EasyGo. Tell us more about what you're installing, the kind of hardware, makes, models, speeds. Tell us more.
Hi Euan, thank you very much for having me. I don't think I have much more to say after Pamela. I think Pamela covered everything that I was about to say anyway. But it's fantastic. It's a great project to be involved in, albeit a very tight timeline. But what it shows is that where there's a will, there's a way to get charge points fitted into communities and onto the island of Ireland at pace when needed. And I think that's going to be needed over the next few years, because I think with the rollout of electric vehicles, plug-in vehicles, there's going to be a huge demand for not just these chargers, but for a lot more chargers to be fitted. So, it's great to see all of the stakeholders working together to make projects like this happen in such a short timeline. And it proves to councils, it proves to government bodies, it proves to private companies that yes, it can be done, and yes, you can get teams to work together to make something like this happen. So yeah, we're delighted to be part of it. The equipment that we fitted, as Pamela had mentioned, we were thrilled when we saw that some of the sites had a larger capacity for power than what was the scope of the tender that we won. So in the early stages after winning the tender, we spoke to each of the councils, all of the stakeholders involved, to see, how can we maximize things to make it a better charging experience for drivers? I've driven an EV for 4 years myself, a little over 4 years myself. One of the things that I hate, and even though it's something we do as a company, I hate where there's just a one charge point that you pull up to the charge point, or you look on the app and you see you're 10 minutes away. You see the charge point is free, and then when you get there, you find somebody just about to plug in, and they're going to be there for 40 or 50 minutes, and you still have to wait there. So by working with the councils and looking at the power, it allowed us to put in a certain amount of charging hubs in key locations, which really benefits drivers. But it also allowed us to take a little variation away from the specified 50 and 100s for singles and duals, to actually put in 180s and 75s, and utilize what power was there. So it's worked out quite well. I'm going to say a big thank you to Garrett here from M&M. The guys have been brilliant with working with us and getting the installations done in such a short period of time. The councils have been fantastic for facilitating as well, and we're looking forward to seeing them go live as soon as possible.
It certainly looks exciting, and the speed at which those are being commissioned as well, you were saying, is very impressive too. I'm going to sort of break from my usual rule of taking questions at the end, because there's 3 very good ones that have come through on the chat. So in order, we'll be taking one from Darren, one from Mark McCall, also of EVA&I, and also from Brian Rankin, who is one of the key local authority personnel who was actually involved in the consortium, all of which sound really interesting. But in order, Darren, you had a great question. Are the Faster Project chargers all going to be accessible 24/7, or are some of them going to be inaccessible overnight or at weekends or anything like that, depending on the location they've been installed? Is there going to be 24/7 access for all?
I can take that one. No, they're not all 24/7 access. That was obviously something we were seeking at the outset of the project and would have been ideal. But as Pam said, there have been challenges at every juncture, and one of those was when we hit the issue of not being able to use the car parks that we thought we could have used. Then we were looking at other council buildings that councils owned to install them there, and again marrying that with whether there was capacity at that site or not just didn't always tally up, with that site also being open 24/7. So we had to go with what we had within the time frame that we have available. So they're not all 24/7, no.
That's a real shame. I wonder if there would be a way around that by having some sort of RFID access for EV drivers. So it would be like a barrier that you would tap your EasyGo or associated RFID card on, and that would allow you to get in and charge if needs be. But yeah, just spitballing at this point. But yeah, obviously 24/7 access would be ideal. However, we appreciate that a lot of these would have been the reserve sites, the backup sites, which got squeezed in as those kind of local authorities, the 5 local authorities of the original 8, got a bit kind of skittish. But the lessons learned from this are inevitably going to be invaluable for the rest of those local authorities in Northern Ireland. And I've seen that today. So Mark actually says that with regards to the kind of metering built into the on-street charge point thing that I mentioned earlier, and I know that obviously that Chris had both very kindly answered on that one. Mark mentions that other charge point operators tell us that they don't necessarily have to do that in Republic of Ireland, only in Northern Ireland. So I'm intrigued if there's any kind of further feedback on the exact nuances of that rule in Northern Ireland, any kind of variation between the Republic and the North. With regards to the exact location of metering for predominantly kind of on-street public installations.
Yeah, I can jump in here, Euan, on the Republic. So there are a couple of locations. If it's a car park, if it's a public car park, it's fine. That rule doesn't apply. But if it's a public street, then it does apply. We're working with ESB networks in the south, where there is a new rule has come out, a rule that they've changed to allow us to fit charge points. But as Chris McGuire had mentioned, it's the ownership of the cable underneath the ground in public spaces still has to sit with ESB networks in the Republic, and that's only in these on street locations. So if you had a main street in a town, it's the cable there. But if the council actually own a car park that is off the side of the town or at the back of shops or somewhere like that, that's treated as private. So that may be where there might be differences seen.
Thank you. That's good to know. And actually, we have a surprise appearance from Brian Rankin, as I mentioned, who says he's happy to provide some further council feedback on behind the meter connections, which sounds quite interesting. So let's have a look. See, do we have Brian? Here we go. I'm going to allow you to talk, Brian. So if you've got your mic or your camera with you, do come on in. It'd be great to get your feedback on the behind the meter connections. Just as a heads up, we cannot hear you at the moment. What we'll do is, if you're able to kind of speak and we kind of hear your voice project in through the ether somewhere, then we'll stop what we're doing and we'll pick that up. Failing that, if you type it in the chat, and then we can pick up on that feedback in just a minute. But it'd be really interesting because, of course, Brian was an integral part of the FASTER project. But back onto the topic of the EasyGo chargers, before we bring in Gareth to show us exactly what's going in and tell us more about the progress being made, there was a very good question that was raised by EVA and I, and that is CHAdeMO support, particularly because one of the sites that was due to be commissioned had a pair of new 50 or 75 kilowatt chargers, and all of the plugs on them were CCS. But Chris, I believe that there is some good news on that one, and that's very much a temporary setup, such as the way that these chargers are procured. So tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely, Euan. So when we get the charge points in, we order them with dual CCS, because there's such a small amount of CHAdeMO users out there now on the networks, but we're still not going to ignore them. So on commissioning, and we do know some of the key and EV drivers have been out taking photographs of the chargers installed. When they were installed with dual CCS. But for the sites where we have all our 50s and 75s, we're actually changing out at least one connector to be a CHAdeMO connector. And of course, we'll be doing like we do with all of the sites, where we've got charging hubs. If there happens to be a lot of use on a CHAdeMO connector there, we've the possibility of changing out and adding another CHAdeMO connection if needs be. But typically we see one site, one CHAdeMO connector, and the rest CCS.
That sounds like a decent compromise to me, but I want to bring in Darren, of course, again, from an EV driver's perspective, to tell us more about whether it's time to wave goodbye to CHAdeMO in Northern Ireland, or how well supported it should be, and for how long yet.
It's certainly not time to get rid of CHAdeMO. I mean, we do realize the vast majority of newer and more recent vehicles are CCS, but there's a huge number of cars out there, Nissan Leaf, CNV 200 vans, things like that that use and require CHAdeMO, particularly because they tend to be the smaller battery ones. I think yourself, you drive a 24 kilowatt hour Leaf, so those actually would require it. So it's far too early to do that. But there is a sensible approach here of if there's 4 leagues, then having one of them, 25% of them to be dedicated to CHAdeMO, something like that, or 50% on single sites is a sensible approach. That it is important that we support those vehicles, particularly for sustainability. We do not want these vehicles to have to be scrapped because they can't be charged. We want them to go on for years and years and be used for as they need to be. So CHAdeMO is very important going forward. But we do recognise, obviously, the swing to the standard of CCS will start to increase there.
Well said. It's definitely a key point about the kind of just transition, because the Leaf is arguably the most affordable second-hand EV that you can get. It's also mechanically very reliable. The battery is annoyingly electrochemically, it's one of the most kind of naff designs of battery pack, and I can say that as an electrochemist, but it's still solid enough. And it certainly does the job. In fact, my Leaf is powering this conversation because I've got a special vehicle to grid charger enabled by CHAdeMO. It's a shame that Betamax lost the format war once again. But yeah, very well said about the need to support CHAdeMO, because there are tens of thousands of Leafs across Britain and Ireland as well. So yeah, we need to be ensuring that they continue to be supported. Otherwise, you will literally not be able to venture outside of your immediate vicinity. Now, before we continue, such was our sort of flurry of panelists who joined us just before we went live, and then there were people who had to drop off, like Pamela and people like Andrew who kind of came on later. Quick show of hands, everybody, if anyone has a hard stop at 11 o'clock. Nope, we're all good. Excellent. Thank you. Oh, actually, Andrew does. So what we'll do is we'll very quickly jump on to Andrew Benfield from Senex before we come back to Gareth, who's been waiting ever so patiently to actually show us these chargers that are going in the ground. So Andrew, of course, you've done a stellar job in all of Ireland with regards to the in-person aspects of the Faster project. So tell us more about Senex's involvement, not least with the Enniskillen Roadshow.
Thanks, Euan. Yeah, I guess we were really excited to get involved, and the main thing that I was involved in was organising the sessions for the Enniskillen event, which I think went very well. We had some really interesting initial conversations about not only sort of driver experience, but sort of wider business opportunities and startups. So we had Maeve from Go Pluggable, which is a sort of charge point sharing app, which she's been developing and is getting some traction with and investment into. So it was interesting to show how the EV transition isn't just about kind of constricting choice or this fast change of propulsion systems. It's also about trying to there are opportunities to create real economic change and local business opportunities within that. I think the key thing that came out from me from the day was a thirst for information from the public. There was a lot of questions, particularly about charging, how it works, particularly about understanding the pricing, I think. So, there's a lot of concern about, where do you charge? How much is it going to cost you? How do you find the best ones? So I think there's a real thirst for a continuous independent information available for consumers about not only cars, but other vehicles, second-hand vehicles. We had a really good discussion about affordability, and one of the Faster partners gave an excellent talk through how a salary sacrifice scheme might work. And it was really heartening to see they were getting a lot of interest from people after the session who were approaching them, who obviously not thought of that way before as a method of purchase that does obviously make the vehicles significantly more affordable on a monthly payment basis. So yes, I think there's plenty more to be done in terms of raising awareness of, giving people a chance to ask some questions. There's a lot of myths floating about, as we've discussed in this forum many times, and I think people are just confused. So they took their opportunity to ask people that had some expertise or real life experience of driving EVs, and seemed to get a lot out of that.
And we thank you for your service on that one too. It's been great having that level of expertise from Cenex on hand, and also the fact you've managed to pull together, obviously, these in-person events. I appreciate you do need to run, so if you have any last words before you run, it would be great to hear your kind of final thoughts on the project.
Sorry, I missed most of that question. I just caught the last bit.
Oh, sorry. It was basically, we know you have to run, but if you've got any last words on the FASTER project and Cenex's involvement and how Cenex can help other local authorities to expand their infrastructure, give us a shout just now, and then we can let you get on your way.
I didn't hear that again, but it's fine. I think I caught the gist at the back end of the
any last words, basically.
Your last bit.
Yeah.
It was about general thoughts on the program, on the impact of the program, and I think one of the biggest and most important things for me is it's brought this grouping of people together, because in Cenex experience across the rest of GB, of rolling out and helping to advise on electric vehicle charging rollout, the most important thing above anything else, well, having some money is a nice start, obviously, having some grant incentives, but having the same people in the room, having CPOs in the room with policymakers, with the DNOs, with councils, and with drivers, having all of them in the room to continue to develop the conversation, develop the knowledge. And that's what we're doing in these types of forums. So I think, I don't know how this is going to continue, but it'd be great if there was a continuation of this type of forum where everyone was together talking about the issues. Because I think what I've noticed in working in this sphere within Northern Ireland for the last sort of 3 or 4 years is, the quality of discussion and the informed discussion is really, really kind of ramped up. And I think FASTER has been a big part of that.
Yeah, very wise words. Well said. And I will certainly see you at such a forum, should it be developed. I very much hope that there will be serious, kind of coming together of all of these important stakeholders beyond the FASTER project too. But in the meantime, Andrew, it has been a pleasure working with you as well. So thank you so much. We'll let you run just now. And Gareth, you've only had to wait an hour to come in. Good to see you again. You've been very busy installing about 26, 27 chargers, haven't you? So you're normally pretty good at having some photos on hand of the latest hot off the press developments. Do tell us more, do share.
Yeah, I would say it's probably 26 in my opinion. So yeah, look, it's been really, really busy. Obviously the work consisted of 3 different council areas, 16 different sites, 26 high power chargers in 10 weeks. That's aggressive. That's very, very aggressive. Taking into the combination of these being public areas, sports centers, etc., etc. So it becomes very demanding, and we've literally done it. We're there. Another week to go. The guys are working 24/7, 7 days a week. Well, maybe not 24/7, 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. And you'll see, possibly, if I have some photographs here, you'll see they're at it night and day. But they'll get there, they'll get it done. And I think it's important. It's an important milestone. This is 2 years in the making. And they give us 10 weeks to get it done. So we're here.
True. Well, I mean, you've got some photos handy, you were saying. Please do share away.
Yeah, and I'll share. I'll also caveat it as well that these are just photographs taken by the guys on site just as they leave. So they still need to be checked, commissioned, looked at. So they're just literally hot off the press. So they're not even in the public domain as yet.
That's quite all right. Yeah. We appreciate they're not going to be like, professional photographer quality.
No, that's exactly what it's not. And let's see if I can do that. So here's one in particular. This is your White Rock Leisure Centre. It's a great location. It's up in West Belfast, and it's a good unit. Then we have a new unit. That's a 180 on the Shore Road. So it's a great location. It's the Grove Leisure Centre, and that's obviously a Siemens product, which is excellent. Here we have one up at Lisnashara, 2 units there, which is great location as well along the Knockdual carriageway, so it'll be great for EV drivers just based off the Montgomery Road. Let's see, we have Brook Leisure Centre, so that's a little bit further up in the west of the city, so it gives a nice coverage for EV drivers from that perspective. Moving out, we have a Bangor Sportsplex. You can see there's a van parked in the background. It's obviously somebody just checking the location. I think we have another one there in Bangor. They were just finishing off the other day, just putting up on some signage and then giving the units a little bit of rub down and getting them ready for handover. So they've all, that's the team out there just giving the units a clean down, the bollards are clean down, and then give them one last power wash and clean. This one here, actually an interesting one, very, very, very tight site. It's one you'll be interested in as well, from a disability access. So we're still under discussion with that one to figure out the best way. It's a great location, fantastic view using in Newcastle County Down. So we're still discussing that, but we've done it and it's under review just how accessible that is, both right and left of the location. But that's what we have done so far, and then we'll pick it up with the University of Ulster and the ECC or SEC as well, just to chat about it a little bit further. So that one's 95% complete, with some road markings and possible adoption work still to be done there to make it a little bit more accessible for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you've been dealt a rough hand in terms of some of the locations to try and make them as accessible as possible. So the fact you've got those cross hatchings that look, again, without me getting a measuring tape out, as if they should hopefully just about be wheelchair accessible. The fact you've done that is very promising. I also like the fact that this particular site that you've got up just now, you know, at first glance, you might think, oh, you know, it's around the back of this hostile looking building, but there is CCTV there and there is a floodlight. So, you know, one would hope that at least it would be, you know, fairly secure, certainly with enough kind of deterrence for any kind of funny goings on.
It's a very good location, Euan. It's just off the Springfield Road.
Oh, perfect.
It's a connection to the west of the city as well, which is predominantly very, very good, both accessible from the city centre right up to the international airport. So it's got that in between. It also gives everybody else a good bit of access. You know, people sort of look at the end product and they go, God, that was easy. But there's a lot of work involved in between all that. See if we've got some photographs. Try and do this.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. So that's sort of the work in progress on a couple of locations. And we'll see. These are obviously just from the operational guys themselves. So we're taking everything with a little bit of pinch of salt. And you can see it's creeping into the late evening. So the teams are still there. They're still working and they're still pushing through the darkness to get the work done. That's obviously out in Bangor as well, Bangor Aurora. So that's one of the last sites to be done. And they're currently actively working on that, and we'll finish that. They'll be working on that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and probably into Monday next week, which you'll see that one at a close. And there's one of the guys working away. So there is a little bit more to it than literally plonking of chargers. There's definitely a lot of work that goes in the background.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
A lot of planning and programming to get these jobs delivered on time.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. As I say, you know, the fact that the site selection had to be restrictive to begin with, and the fact that we've got these what appear to be, you know, pretty accessible bays, particularly that first one there. And also, yeah, there were a couple of sites where there was a curb up to the charger, but because most of them are tritium, and you know, you've obviously got the easily accessible holsters right on the front, one would hope that would be deemed pretty accessible. That said, the ultimate feedback will be from the Charge to Access Facebook group, because as an able-bodied individual, you know, I cannot possibly comment on the various you know, restrictions and difficulties that some people may have if you have limited mobility, if you use a wheelchair, etc. So that will be the real litmus test, but I'm looking forward to getting that feedback, because clearly there has been consideration of accessibility from the outset in comparison to some pretty big charging networks that really should know better. who continue to make super tight, kind of like multi-story car park spaces for rapid chargers, which means that if you have limited mobility, you physically need to get someone else to plug the car in for you. So yeah, again, congratulations to.
There are two aspects of that. Just sorry. The design is actually taken disability access and access for all into the consideration. So that has been through the planning stage. But ultimately, everything is built off specifications, detail, and when they're opened and when they're running and when the EV drivers, you start to use them, if there is alterations or they need to be modified slightly to make it more workable, if there's something that we haven't picked up from the initial design and needs rework slightly, that's also part of the work in progress, because it's not just let's plonk it, leave it, and hope it's okay. We'll go back, we'll rechange and make it more pleasurable as possible, make it more workable as possible. So that's the test, is the first couple of months that they're there, and then we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll keep an eye on any positive feedback. I mean positive in that it's, have you thought about doing this or doing that to help us?
Oh yeah. I mean, well, inevitably with anything that is in the public domain, you will get people who will be very angry with their feedback, but you'll get some who will phrase it in exactly as you said, a more kind of, this is great. If we did this slightly different, it would be better. And so I think it would be fair to say that there'd be a call from anyone from the Charge to Access group or the likes of ChargeSafe, who is a major consultancy for accessibility and inclusivity within EV charging infrastructure, and also the past 1899 guidance as well, which is worth checking out. This is not talking direct at yourself, of course, Gareth, but just kind of anyone else listening in, because it's all valuable advice to check out. But there's definitely there is help out there. But I think this is a really strong starting point at the very least, and hopefully ending point as well in terms of the accessibility design. But it's great to hear that M&M Contractors is very much keeping your ear to the ground to hear if there's any other tweaks and modifications that can be done, because quite often it doesn't involve expensive hardware or anything. It's just a simple sort of redesign of a bay layout. So great to hear that this has all been considered. And again, thank you on behalf of the Faster project for all your hard work to put these in the ground so quickly as well. So not just competently, but quickly, given the super tight time frame. So thank you to your entire team, because they must be exhausted by now.
Well, yes, and you can't take away from the aspect of it. A contractor can build it. What it takes a group of professional people to make these projects work effectively, and without EasyGo leading it up, without the borders, without the council, without everybody's input on a daily and weekly basis, sitting down with their weekly calls, going through the daily updates, these projects aren't achievable. M&M are only one aspect of it, and we can only do so much. So without feedback and the input of everybody, that's the reason why this project is a success, for sure.
Definitely. So I see we've got a few questions coming in. We're almost done. It's almost time to head over to the Q&A. I suppose that the final question with regards to the installation of the chargers will be in terms of communication between M&M, between EasyGo, between the wider kind of Faster consortium and EV drivers, not least EVA and I. How's the communication been about the pace of progress throughout the installations? That said, it's all been very, very quickly done. So I suppose that by the time the comms are out there, the charger's in the ground. But how was that communication process to keep everyone up to date with how things are progressing?
Okay.
Go for it, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the project obviously starts off with a project plan, an execution plan, really, and that has been monitored daily through progress diaries, updates. Then there's a group call every Thursday where we go through every site, every location, and that's the input of EasyGo and Sharon, Pamela, and the council areas that we're working in, and collectively, along with the Stephen Clark consultants, we combine. We look at a 1 week to 2 week ahead of program, and we stick to that, and then we rework the program week in, week out. And really, it's with such a demand on the program. Communication, planning, and delivery is the three things that they need done, and collectively everybody on this call and behind the scenes has done that.
Thank you. Thank you. And also the other good news, of course, is just how quickly these chargers are being connected to the grid. If we compare it to the Scottish webinar that we had a couple of about a month ago, actually, and we were discussing the fact that these chargers for the Faster project were in the ground, had been for several weeks, but hadn't been connected to the grid, despite the fact that SSEN, the equivalent of NIE networks for the Faster project in Scotland, had provided the grid supply. It was all because EDF hadn't physically put a meter in. They were taking their sweet time about it, and it was a major bugbear. But Chris Maguire, you were telling us that the situation is much rosier in Northern Ireland because of these behind the meter connections. So they're going straight on the grid, aren't they, pretty much?
In this particular project, yeah, that was what was the solution. So NIE in effect doesn't have to carry out any works because the existing supply is already to the property.
Which is brilliant news, because that means that these will be online basically early December for most of them, I would have thought, which is great news. So I suppose we're almost at Q&A now, but it would be great to get a little recap from some kind of key stakeholders here about the kind of key learnings of the Faster project. Darren has snuck in there on the chat. So yeah, tell us your kind of overall reflections on the Faster project then.
Yeah, I suppose the overall reflections are largely positive. Obviously, the dropping out of some councils, and we need to find out the reasons why and try and help those stakeholders to make steps forward. So we would like to work with those stakeholders. But it's been positive, and just to give a sense of the growth in Northern Ireland. This time last year, we were sitting at about 20 rapid chargers in Northern Ireland. Today, we're 58. Before these ones go live, these will take us to about 84 rapid chargers at 26, as Gareth has confirmed. So that will take us to 84 chargers. In terms of leads, because as you can see, most of those have dual leads, we'll go from 81 leads to 136, which is a great step forward. So really good, but we have to tinge it with some realism as well. Whilst that's quadrupling in a year, which is fantastic progress, we're still a significant portion behind the rest of GB. And the GB average is about 13.6 rapid chargers per 100,000 population. With these EasyGo ones put in, we're about 4.1. So we need the pace of change here, and that's why we're so strong and trying to get the lessons learned from this important project out there and get that through the task force and through into other CPOs, because we need to have this kind of turnaround to be able to meet the requirements for net zero. So
well said. And of course, it's important to remember as well that it's not just for household residents of Northern Ireland who may not have access to a driveway. I know that the majority of residents in Northern Ireland do have off-street parking, but as someone who's just come back from Northern Ireland as a tourist / they run business as well, I was relying on the rapid charging infrastructure in Northern Ireland, and the same could be said of taxis, of vans, of anyone who's doing kind of cross-border travel and so on. That's going to be absolutely imperative to build out that infrastructure. But Tim, from DFI's perspective, of course, trying to improve the decarbonisation of transport, tell us more about your kind of reflections in terms of the department's thoughts on the Faster project and how it's panned out.
Well, I think in terms of the switching fuel aspect of what we're trying to do and working with our climate action plans and factoring in the potential reduction in emissions with the switch to zero emission vehicles, it's always flagged up from car dealerships and manufacturers that the barrier to selling these vehicles is a lack of infrastructure. So when you see a project like Faster, which is in receipt of public money and EU money coming on board and starting to increase the number of rapid chargers available, as Darren said, the growth that we've seen in the last few months is massive, and it shows what can be done. And Faster was part of that, kicking that all off. So showing what can be done was a thing. But I think the other thing for us is the Faster project is looking at that consortium of bringing people together. And particularly with our local councils getting involved, because it's been a very steep learning curve from them. Other than the project, the Faster project, the councils are involved in the ORCs funding scheme that you mentioned earlier. So it's saying at that lower level from central government, people at local level getting involved and working to a common goal and teasing out the problems. And Darren quite rightly flagged up, it's the lessons learned that come out of this that then can inform and move forward for the next tranche of installations. That's going to be the key. And I think we talked earlier, mentioned the fact that some sites that were originally there have fallen out, but those people involved in that were in this process, so they've learned lessons that they can then apply moving forward. So from that's from a DFI perspective. I think hopefully you could all hear me, because
no, it's all
you've
good.
frozen. You've just frozen on me. Just.
All right. Oh, fair enough. Hopefully you can
Oh,
still
yeah,
hear
you're
me
back.
now.
You're moving. Yes, you're moving
Yeah.
now. Sorry.
Good.
So that's our reflections on it. It's amazing what the last few months have shown. When if you got the green light, you got a charge point operator in, and bang, it's in the ground and off you go. And the thing as well, moving forward slightly around this and the lessons learned, is that a lot of people around the orgs moving forward is going to be looking at more private funding being levered in. So it won't be looking at applications that are supported with government match funding. So the model that we're seeing rolled out in Great Britain is a certain amount of public funding, whether that's local council or central government, but it's looking at least that to be 50% match funded from the private sector. And you touched, Euan, on the concession models, and I know that Andrew Benfield's company Cenex are heavily involved in this in Great Britain, and that seems to be the model that's being rolled out now in Great Britain, is looking at partnerships with the private sector to deliver this infrastructure.
Very true. And whether it's a concession model or whether it's the likes of ORCs, obviously Department for Infrastructure, for anyone who's not familiar, has a unique kind of position within Britain and Ireland, because you look after all of the roads and all of the council quote unquote car parks at the moment, don't you? Although the car park situation's due to change.
No, we don't look after car parks. Car parks were transferred to the local authorities in the 1990s.
Oh, right.
We carried on if you like, a parking enforcement management function for the councils and local authorities, and that role is transferring more recently to the councils to take forward. So that would have been the guys in the red coats going around checking that you've paid your ticket and stuff. We would have carried on performing that function, but that's all moving to local authorities.
Right. That makes sense.
So we don't have any role. We don't have any role around car parking, public car parking, let's say.
Oh, fair point. It was with regards to public charging. So obviously, ORCs has been mentioned a few times. It would be remiss of me not to mention it, because I think there'll be a few people in this chat who'll be intrigued by it. So am I right in saying that the process in Northern Ireland, if you wanted to get some sort of suitable discrete charging infrastructure that minimises street furniture and make sure there's still plenty of room for walking and wheeling, etc., on the pavement, if you wanted to get one outside your house, if you didn't have a driveway, you'd need to get planning permission from the council, but you'd also need a street works order from DFI. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, maybe talk about ORCs, because ORCs is a good. You touched on some of the things. A lot of the funding that's available to install EV charging is run at UK level through the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles, supported by the Energy Savings Trust. So ORCs is one example. On-street residential charge point scheme. There are other charging or funding streams available. There is a workplace charging scheme, and that workplace charging scheme's actually been extended to include small accommodations such as guest houses and caravan sites and caravan parks. So owners of those can apply for funding to install charging in those sites. Now, we're not aware of anybody in Northern Ireland from that sector having made any application. So we've worked hard with UK government to ensure that those funding streams extend across the UK. On-street residential charge point scheme is only available to local authorities. So at the minute, there are 3 applications being processed. One is led by a council consortium, led by Derry City and Strabane District Council. Another one is Newry Morning Down, and recently Belfast City Council has submitted an application. So the level of grant funding being brought out through that is £2.2 million. and the department is match funding that to the tune of £600,000. Now, moving forward on ORCs, the funding stream for the next scheme will run to 50-50 funding rate, and they will look at the 50% coming in from the private sector. So that's how that regime's moving. So that is to assist people without access to a driveway. And we're very pleased at being able to support that. Now, what you're coming into, Euan, is, and the same process, I would say, applies in Great Britain with the local authorities also. It's not unique to Northern Ireland. If you are not a utility company and you wish to install something on the pavement, you have to comply with a street works order. And that sets out that you need to apply for a street works license. And there is a process on our website that enables you how you go through that. So anybody, a utility company does not have, a utility company, I would say, has the authority to dig up the road or the pavement to address the utilities. But it also has to go through another process called INTERREG, which liaises with ourselves. And the idea behind that is that you want to know what utility companies are going to do, so that you don't get, say, for example, and I'm going to say this and people are going to say you're talking nonsense because it happens. You don't want to see one day Phoenix digging the road up and the next day NI Networks come down and dig the same part of the road up. The idea is to try and coordinate it so that you get works done at the same time. So that's how utility companies work, Euan. But individuals or other companies have to apply for street works license to go in and dig the road up and reinstate it back to the condition it was in. That helps explain the position.
Certainly does. That's good to know. Thank you. But obviously, it's just the sort of slight extra consideration in comparison to mainland Britain with DFI's kind of overarching involvement. So it's really good to have that explained. Thank you very much. Hopefully that means
I saw
that,
Euan, sorry, I was just going to, in one of the questions on the question and answer session,
Oh, yeah.
somebody asked about the EasyGo charges. Will are there any plans for EasyGo to get live charger status onto the likes of ZapMap, etc., like that there? I just wanted to flag up that there are a series of regulations have gone through Westminster in October. There are consumer regulations that apply to charge point operators, and one of them relates to open data. And this is about the idea that you should be able to easily access where a network is and a charge point's available and stuff like that. So that's now a regulatory requirement that charge point operators have to comply with. So hopefully that clarifies that question.
Well spotted. Thank you, Tim. And before we go to the rest of the Q&A, which is properly lighting up now, by the way, we've had lots of people answer. Apparently, a few of the questions have been answered already by some of you in the background. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Darren and Chris Kelly, for working your way through them. But we'll obviously answer some of them live as well, because there are some great ones in there. Keep them coming. But Sharon, it would be remiss of us not to leave the kind of final word before Q&A to the FASTER project consortium lead that is East Border region. Your reflections on the FASTER project then, particularly, of course, in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, well, I suppose, it's been, as already has been alluded to, a very challenging project in terms of timeframes and issues around, as Marino, looking at the types of connections that we were going to have to proceed with, just dealing with things like that. Capacity was a big issue, finding sites that married up with having the capacity available there. And, look, I suppose going forward, in terms of lessons learned or things you would, for the future, time is really critical here in these types of projects, especially, something like this with EV being a new remit for local authorities. So, yeah, you definitely time and planning and getting the procurements out there as early as possible, because as already been, I think Tim has already said, once we actually got the the tenders appointed, the actual delivery time has been relatively quick. As Gareth and Chris said, there was no choice there and the time that was left, but even if we had have started that process a year ago, it still would have been the quickest part of the whole process. It was the getting to that point was what took time. So yeah, having more time, planning the procurements well in advance and liaising with the likes of your DNOs, as early as possible is what we'd take forward.
Wise words indeed. Thank you, Sharon. Before we head to the Q&A, we did actually get some interesting feedback from Brian Rankin, who, as I said, was one of the key local authority personnel within the FASTER project. Apparently his mic was acting up, or rather Zoom's settings were. But in addition to reiterating the challenges on behind the meter connections, as we've already kind of covered, which were some of the reasons why the 5 local authorities that were originally involved had to kind of pull out, but are obviously still looking into what's possible. Because it was all, it was basically time limited. As we were using existing electricity connections for behind the meter connections at those buildings, then there were a number of implications. For example, considering other load on the site, links with other equipment such as solar panels, and your kind of heat pumps and so on, generators, the tariffs and capacity charges for electricity as well, because the sites are all on half-hourly electricity tariffs. So more work for councils and EasyGo to work out the capacity charges, etc. We also need to consider future works on site, which may require capacity, such as decarbonisation through heat pumps, if there's not already, or additional charge points for their electric fleet. These were issues that we've been working through, so full credit to all of those involved in the FASTER project. Clearly, a lot has been learned. So even if it wasn't quite possible to bring those 5 councils on board within the time frame of the project, clearly they've learned a lot, and in the not too distant future we should start to see some more public charging infrastructure popping up at those original sites, and maybe quite a few more that are owned by that authority. So thank you, Brian. That's really interesting feedback. We've got 8 questions now in the Q&A. So James Whatton says, do you see the next step as developing purpose-built rapid EV charging hubs, for example, 10 spaces or more? And will there be grid connection issues for such developments? So I think this kind of comes back to Chris Maguire and the discussion of the need for a high voltage grid connection for greater than 1 megawatt developments. And on top of that, I'm going to throw in there an article from the Belfast Telegraph that I discovered a couple of months ago, talking about a grid policy change that could remove the barrier to decarbonisation for Northern Irish firms. So on that note, Northern Ireland grid connections are / until recently were very expensive in comparison to mainland Britain. So in addition to the question about what's the next step? Are there going to be bigger charging hubs? What are the grid connection issues going to be for them? Tell us more about the unique way that grid connections are priced in Northern Ireland, and how these reforms will actually help to make them more affordable.
So the cost for a connection is specific to that part of the network. So what NI will do is undertake an assessment and see, that specific location for that demand you've asked for, what infrastructure is needed to facilitate it. So we encourage, as we mentioned, early engagement is key for all these projects, because they can be very complex and very large. In terms of the costing side of things, in Northern Ireland, the connecting customer pays for the network reinforcement at the voltage they connect to and the voltage above, which is unique to Northern Ireland. In GB, reinforcement costs have been fully socialised to the general bill payer. So the connecting customer doesn't pay for reinforcement under certain thresholds. So the utility regulator and DFE have undertook a recent call for evidence on the charging methodology that's applied here, and that's recently closed, I think. So the next steps will be for the UR and DFE to review those consultation responses and advise on what the next steps may be. So there may be a change in terms of what happens there in that process. But yes, for the moment, it's probably more expensive to connect here based on those charging criteria.
Hence, I suppose, why the FASTER project, by virtue of the size of the individual locations, has worked out so well, so quickly, because it could be done behind the meter on existing buildings with existing supplies. We were very fortuitous in being able to build that out, and it is such a shame that we couldn't bring those councils towards the West on board, as Alan Galt has just mentioned in the chat. Alan also mentions that ESB have been slow to replace existing defunct chargers at present, but that we've been doing a great job at hotels in the area. So that's interesting feedback. Darren, as the voice of the EV driver, I see him nodding away there, generally in agreement. So
sorry, just to add that, there is, to answer that question fully, there is 3 current sites with 10 or more superchargers currently being built in Northern Ireland, which we're building.
Oh, wow.
So those are due to be operational in Q1 of this year.
Superb. So even if the grid's connection may be a bit pricey at the moment, it's definitely doable if you're clever about your planning and know exactly where you're putting it. I'm looking forward to seeing those going live. Definitely keep us posted on that one. It'll be great to see exactly what kind of shape they take. So an anonymous attendee has asked a very good question. Will the EasyGo chargers that are part of the Faster project be visible on other providers' apps or just locked to the EasyGo app/network? So I think it's fair to say they'd be on the likes of ZapMap and so on. But what about roaming platforms like Power or Octopus Electroverse, etc.? Chris, what's the situation there?
Yeah, Ewan. So the chargers absolutely can be added to the likes of ZapMap and things like that. And generally, I'd be surprised, to be honest. I haven't checked ZapMap. I'd be surprised if they're not on already. EV drivers are fantastic for adding charge points and locations as soon as they see groundwork's being carried out. So we have interoperability connection through Jurev. It's how we connect up to the ESB eCars network and app, and Ionity apps and chargers as well. So it is something that we are working on, making it a two-way thing. We haven't done it as of yet, but it is something that we're trialing, and it's something that we hope to make available next year.
Very good to hear. Kevin Ramsey asks, has any user feedback been received yet? Now, of course, these sites have, well, they're in the process of being commissioned. So in terms of actually using them, there's not going to be any feedback yet. But obviously, Darren, there has been feedback from EV drivers about the layout and plug types and so on. We've pretty much covered that already. But is there any other feedback that's worth chucking in at this point, or do you reckon we've covered that already?
I think it's largely been covered, and especially the approach for accessibility was welcomed, as was called out earlier there. So no, I think it's largely been covered in the interest of time here.
Yeah, no worries. Down to the last 3 questions. Alan Hunter asks, is there any discussion on current planning policy 1C15 regarding roadside service stations? This policy does not mention EV charging. Present policy, no service stations within 12 miles. Okay, so who wants to take this one? Because it would be good to have, wherever there's a roadside service station, you would think that there would be the need to have charging infrastructure, not just for private cars, but for vans, for public transport like buses and coaches and so on as well, and HGVs. So I think, Tim, you're gearing up to answer this one.
Well, I mean, what it is a planning policy that applies in Northern Ireland. And just for information, that same policy in Great Britain is 28 miles. So what it says is that planning permission planning permission for a service station or service area is only permitted where there's within 12 miles of an existing site where there's demonstrable demand. But that is the policy. The terms of the application of that policy or the ruling of that rests with local councils. So planning applications are made by an applicant to the local council. It's how the local council applies that policy is really up to each local council. If an applicant was to make an application and was rejected under that policy, they have the right to appeal that to the Planning Appeals Commission, and that's their role. From a DFI perspective, that policy is in place until such times as our local councils come forward with their local development plans. And each of our local councils are all at different stages in bringing forward their local development plans, but that's where they will put that in, and they can change that policy through that. In terms of how that policy applies, it doesn't apply on every route. It applies on what we call protected routes in DFI, and those are our main trunk roads. Now, to help people understand why it's there, if you were, for example, to drive along the road from Belfast towards Ballygawley, you will notice there are no service areas along that road. You have to leave the road to go to them. When the old road was in place, they were there all the time. So as we build new roads in the Dulan up to Dungiven, there are no service areas actually on the road. You have to come off the road to go to them. And the reason behind that is safety. It's about people going into those areas, decelerate and then pull in and then they come back out and have to accelerate up to speed. So if you have, for example, we'll use the example of a petrol station, and then 200 yards down the road, you have an EV charging hub. That poses a potential risk to road users. So that's what's behind the policy. And if you see any new roads being built, you'll notice that any new dualling of roads, we put in what are called grade separated junctions, and the service areas are in around those. We have to actually come off the road to go to them. So that hopefully explains to people how that policy is envisaged to work. But it is really down to the local councils how they apply it. Yeah.
Very good to know. Thank you, Sim. We have a penultimate question here. It's a great one from Brian Hughes. Are there any penalties in place to discourage internal combustion engine cars from blocking the new faster project rapid chargers? Now, this might vary depending on the local authority, I presume, but who's got any feedback on whether there's going to be any active patrolling of these bays to make sure they don't get blocked by petrol cars? I don't know, is Sharon still hiding in the background? I don't know if Sharon will have any info on that one from a local authority perspective as part of the consortium. But
I think Sharon has dropped off, Ian, but
no worries.
what I'm aware, I don't think the project steering group, now there may have been discussions around the issue, but I don't think we have any active measures planned. I suppose our remit was to deliver the infrastructure, and then I suppose councils will take that upon themselves to look at how they're managing their own car parks, and if there are issues with icing, that would be something that I'm sure councils will look at themselves.
Funny you should mention that, because one of my, shameless plug here, one of my little side projects is working on a very scalable, affordable solution to icing. So any of those local authorities looking for a solution to that, give us a call. But the final question of the day is from Henry Switzer. Thank you, Euan, for all the faster webinars. Very kind of you. Very interesting and helpful, he says. Well, I mean, that's because of the rest of the panelists we've had over the years. It's been 2 years of this. It's been great. But Henry asks, can we access recordings of previous webinars? So if you're watching this on YouTube, you already know the answer. But we do have the Faster Project YouTube channel where all of these sessions are uploaded and shall live for perpetuity. And on that note, this is the end of the live Faster Project webinar series. Yeah, again, thank you so much to everyone who's made it possible. It wouldn't have been anywhere near as interesting without the incredible panelists we've had on over the years. There's way too many to list just now, but what I can say is, in terms of the panelists we have today, thank you again to Gareth, Chris McGuire, Darren Henderson, Tim Weir, Chris Kelly. We've had, I'm going to need to get my list here because there's people coming and going. So we've had Pamela Arthurs, we've had Andrew Benfield, and of course Sharon Digby and Donal, who is the star of the show. Have I missed anyone? I'm sure I've said everyone in front of me. There we go. I should have read the list in order. But the point is that you've all been absolutely brilliant. And Donal, I suppose, yeah, we should absolutely leave the final word to yourself, because you have been so instrumental in pulling all of this together, keeping everything running, and keeping everyone informed. So thank you again to everyone within the Faster Project for everything that you've delivered. Certainly the picture in Northern Ireland is looking great now as a result of this, and it sounds like there's a lot of learnings that can be taken right across Northern Ireland, not just within those 3 local authorities in the West. So watch this space, but also beyond that, you know, the kind of public outreach and consumer confidence that's come about as a result of these events has been brilliant. So Donal, I shall hand over the reins to your good self.
Okay, thank you, Euan. Like, folks, I don't want to keep anybody too much longer. We've had a very, I suppose, a long session this morning, but very informative. And again, just to reiterate what Euan has said, I want to thank each of the panelists here this morning, my project colleagues, Sharon and Pamela, and obviously then the guys, Chris, Darren, Tim, Chris McGuire and Gareth. Some of you I've been working with over the past 2 years, and I suppose Chris and the team at EasyGo have been supportive of the project long before there was ever a tender in place. So I just want again to thank you for that support over the 2 years that Southwest College has been actively on a day-to-day basis working on the project. And Darren and Mark and the team from EVANI, you know, we really do appreciate the support that you have given to the project and been advocates over the years. I know obviously the delivery of the project hasn't been to the speed that we might have liked at times, but I think we are there now, and you know, obviously the learnings that we've discussed this morning will hopefully be useful for you guys as an organization moving forward, and of course for the task force. I think Southwest College, as I've said in previous webinars, our role on the project has been around this whole element of behavioural change and promoting the use of electric vehicles and sustainable transport systems. And from the research that we've carried out and the various surveys, you know, we are seeing increased awareness around electric vehicle use. The challenges still remain. You know, we're still seeing issues around purchase price, still seeing issues around charging anxiety, and all of that. But I think through the webinars, this, I think, is our 17th webinar, and as Henry asked, yes, all the webinars they are all 16 previous to today are on YouTube, and this one will hopefully be up there before the weekend. So hopefully this will be a resource that will last long beyond the lifetime of the FASTER project, and we are actually looking at mechanisms to continue making these resources available to the public, because as the project comes to an end next month, we won't have the resources ourselves, but we are actively engaging with organizations who may continue to build upon this as a resource. So just want to say thank you, I suppose, to everybody that's contributed to the webinars over the past 18 months, and to those people that have attended, and also those people that supported our roadshows in Fort William and Enniskillen earlier in the year. It would have been great to get one in the Republic of Ireland as well, but just time was against us on that one. But we are hosting the closing event for the FASTER project in Dundalk in December, which will be very much a stakeholder event. So we're looking forward to that. And Euan, I just want to thank you for your support, your expertise, and your delivery of the webinars. It's been great working with you over the past almost 2 years now on the webinars, and of course the first series of the films. So your expertise has been invaluable, and I think all of us probably around the room today, the virtual room, have benefited from that knowledge. So thank you. And again, very much just looking forward to seeing these chargers being made available now to drivers, including myself, over the next few weeks. So looking forward to actually testing them out.
Thank you so much. I was about to say, yeah, the FASTER project has had a very personal impact as well, because of course, Donal, you've taken delivery of your electric car, which you did not have at the start of the project. So yeah, it's great to see that, you know, having seen just how doable electric vehicles are today, that you've taken the plunge and you've gone for a good make and model as well. So good on you. But yeah, thank you again. Likewise, it's been a pleasure working with you all, chatting with you all, learning from you all as well. So, and that goes not just to the FASTER Consortium, but to the kind of wider stakeholders, EV drivers, and as you said, everyone who's supported every single webinar, every single roadshow, every single event that we've done. So thank you so much. This may be the end of the FASTER project in terms of the webinar panel YouTube series, but it's definitely not the end of the impact of the FASTER project, which looks as if that is set to continue for a long time in a very positive way. Thank you, all of you, for joining us today.
Bye-bye.